It's February, so our theme for the month is love, which sounds, well, pretty predictable and boring, really. It seems Valentine's Day has become a whole month, and we are barraged with pink, red, and white hearts, and white expressions, and pink and red expressions, and purple of love in every size and font imaginable this time of year. So really, do we have to talk about it here 2 weeks in a row? Well, yes, I think we do. Because the kind of love we talk about in UU contexts is different. I hope I made that clear last week when I described the theological legacy of universal love. And for those of you who weren't here, the image that I shared with the poor, unsuspecting folks who were was of an almighty God dragging the last unrepentant sinner, kicking and screaming into heaven. Thanks to Reverend Mark Morrison Reed for that unforgettable image. Our Universalist theological heritage is of a divine love so unconditional, so boundless, that it envelops every single one of us, whether we want it to or not. One of you told me after last week's service that I probably broke the record for the number of times the word God was uttered in a service. And I'm happy to know that on my first Sunday as your temporary worship minister, I broke a record. And I'm also happy to remind us that our pluralistic faith tradition not only grew out of Protestant Christianity and carries on important aspects of that tradition, but also that the word God and those who use it are welcome here. But God really wasn't the point of my sermon last week. Love was. The point was that we are heirs to a radical, love-centered faith tradition, one that refuses to throw anyone away. A tradition that insists that love, not fear or punishment, has the power to change hearts and minds, to turn us toward the good. A tradition that insists that any salvation worth having is collective. A tradition that commits us to labor together to create the conditions of love to flourish here on earth. Bleeding heart liberal. You've heard the term, maybe even been called it derisively a few times by those who believe that love is for wimps and nice people. But the love our liberal religious tradition calls us to is anything but wimpy. Sometimes it demands that we put things like truth, equity, accountability, and justice above being nice or polite. It demands that we take risks, that we put ourselves on the line to uphold the inherent worth and dignity of all people, that we confront hate and act boldly to repair harm, that we acknowledge our own complicity in systems of oppression. The universal love that we are heirs to is unconditional in that it refuses to give up on people, but that doesn't mean it accepts all forms of behavior. Far from it. It calls us to a high standard of behavior because of our belief in inherent worth and dignity of all people and our knowledge of interdependence. It calls us not just to believe in love, but to act on it, to make it real in this world. How many of you remember the popular slogan, WWJD? It peaked in the 1990s, I think, but it went on for quite a while. What would Jesus do? It was on t-shirts and bracelets, signs, and bumper stickers. My favorite version, actually, was when hybrid cars were coming on the market. And it was WWJD, what would Jesus drive? I think it's actually pretty brilliant. And we can use it too. It works for us if we replace the J with an L. WWLD, what would love do? When faced with a hard decision, we can pause, ground ourselves in our UU values, and ask, what would love in the universalist sense do? If we hear a derogatory joke or witness bullying, what would love do? When we're convinced some horrible person is evil incarnate or it's pledge time, WWLD. When we know what love would do, but are scared to do it, we can pause, tap into the power of love and say, Spirit of love, help me do this thing I know I need to do. Why not draw strength from that source that connects us to really do what love calls us to? Many UU social justice campaigns are rooted in the theology of universal love that calls us to action in the world. Some of you are probably familiar with the bright yellow t-shirts, hats, and signs emblazoned with the UUA's Side with Love logo that easily identify UUs at rallies and protests. These gold shirts and signs have earned us the unofficial name of the Love People. Really, the Love People. Because of our relative visibility in movements for social and ecological justice, people are less likely to know what UUs believe than what we show up for. And in our non-creedal faith tradition, that's perfectly appropriate. We are about deeds, not creeds, we say. But we aren't just called to embody our ideal of universal love in the public sphere. We're called to live it out in our congregations as well. And that can actually be a little more challenging. Because in our spiritual homes, it all gets a little stickier, a little more personal. Right here at home, it's harder to proclaim self-righteously, I'm on the side of love and you aren't. We still do that, of course, in our various ways, but boy does it hurt when we do. And we don't like to admit we do it either. Many of us would much rather avoid and deny conflict than engage it. And that's exactly why our religious forebears created covenants, so that we have something to guide us in the ways of love, something to support our faithful efforts to create beloved community. Like all UU communities, UUSM has many covenants. You have a covenant of right relations, which is printed on the copy of your order of service. And on Zoom, hopefully it's been put in the chat box. This covenant of right relations was created by UUSM members to support you in living out your mission. It is a beautiful covenant, one that names this kind of relationship tending as a spiritual practice. Note also that it names the spirit of love, but it in no way implies that love endures everything or that love precludes conflict. On the contrary, this covenant exists because the love we are called to is a transforming love, a courageous love that addresses harm directly and seeks to heal it, that creates space for engaging conflict with mutual respect and care. This covenant reminds us that we are messy, imperfect, and at times downright nasty, but that we're never beyond repair. No matter how much we kick and scream, there is always a way back to love, back to community. Your ministers also have covenants. Both Reverend Stephanie and I, along with Reverends Ben and Vale, and probably most of the ministers that have served this community, are members of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. The UUMA has a robust covenant and code of conduct that holds us accountable to one another in the practice of ministry. The UUMA covenant begins, united in our call to serve the spirit of love and justice through the vocation of ministry in the liberal religious tradition. We, the members of the UUMA, covenant with one another to, and there's a list of actions, practices that we believe will help us, quote, grow in wholeness and bring hope and healing to the world. You can find the UUMA Covenant online if you're curious, and I encourage you to look at it. Other UU professional associations, like the Musicians Association that Joel belongs to, have codes of professional conduct as well, even if they aren't called covenants per se. In addition to the UUMA covenant, UU ministers often draw up individual covenants to support us when ministering in the same context. Reverend Stephanie and I created a covenant together before I started here. And that's the other document that's stapled to your order of service today, and hopefully also shared in Zoom. Now, some of you might feel slightly uncomfortable reading such a document, as if we're asking you to review our job contracts or to peer behind the curtain when you don't really want to. Why do we need to write all this stuff down? Particularly the parts that differentiate our roles and responsibilities and address potential conflicts. Can't we all just play nicely together? Well, as we learned in our balloon game earlier, we're much more likely to play well together if we all know and agree upon the rules of the game. Stephanie and I created this covenant together, and we are sharing it with you because we value our relationship and because we believe that mutual trust and healthy collegial relationships require transparency, clear boundaries, direct communication, and accountability. We believe that our spiritual practice of covenanting aids us in living out our callings to love and justice with you. So you have covenants with one another, and your ministers have covenants with each other, in addition to our contracts with you, and there are still more. As a member congregation of the UUA, this community also has a covenant with the other 1,000 plus UU congregations in our association, who together covenant to affirm and promote 7 principles that have served in recent decades as a shorthand list of what UUs agree upon. Recognizing that we often fall short of our covenants or misinterpret or ignore them, many UU congregations are adopting an 8th principle that calls us to, quote, journey towards spiritual wholeness by accountably dismantling racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Sometimes we need to adapt our covenants so they truly support us in putting our values into action. I understand you are considering the 8th principle, adopting the 8th principle here at UUSM. And I encourage you to remember as you engage this process that it's not so much the words themselves that matter, but what they point to and ask of us. So WWLD. So you see, we are held in networks of covenant. Covenants make explicit the connections that exist between us, the webs of relationship that hold us together in this faith. The Congregational Life Staff of the UUA writes, covenant is the silk that joins UU congregations, communities, and individuals together in a web of interconnection. None of us can do what love calls us to do alone. Love is by definition relational, and so is our covenantal faith tradition. The covenantal nature of our UU tradition is perhaps its most defining feature. That we are held together in community first by choice, and second by the promises we make to one another was radical in the 17th century, and in some ways it still is radical. Alice Blair Wesley writes this, we UUs are a liberal people over on the left of the free church tradition. The root idea of our entire tradition is covenant. A covenanted free church is a body of individuals who have freely made a profoundly simple promise, a covenant. We pledge to walk together in the spirit of mutual love. The spirit of love is alone worthy of our ultimate concern, our religious loyalty. So we shall meet often to take counsel concerning the ways of love, and we will yield religious authority solely to our own understanding of what these ways are, as best we can figure them out or learn to remember them together. That is Alice Blair Wesley's summation of over 300 years of our covenantal tradition. UUSM is a current manifestation of the once novel idea that a church community could be freely gathered and self-governing, not as a place where anything goes, but as a community organized around mutually agreed upon promises to collectively discern and practice the ways of love. I used to find historical sermons really boring. So I understand if some of you find all this talk of our UU heritage dull. I really do. So why do I keep referring to UU history this week and last week? Because history shapes us. We need to know what brought us to this moment so we can choose what to keep and what to let go of. If we want to play a role in shaping what is to come, we have to know our history, and we have to be transparent about it, even if it makes us uncomfortable. Right now, this community has a choice about how to relate to recent painful events that strain, if not break, your covenants. These events will shape your future. You can't prevent that from happening. But you absolutely can shape how they shape you. I am here because you do not have a settled minister. We don't need to know the details to know there is deep pain around that fact and how it came to be. How you relate to these events, the conflict, matters, my friends. It matters so much. Love is as love does, says the psychologist Scott Peck. So WWLD. What would love do right now, at this moment in your history as a community? What would the love that changes hearts and minds, that points us toward collective salvation, do now at UUSM? I don't have the answers to that question, nor is it my role to offer them if I did. It's up to you to discern together the answers, to lean into your covenants, to draw on your shared values, to embrace your mission. It's up to you to love yourselves and one another unconditionally so that you can do the uncomfortable, brave, and necessary work of love that needs to be done now. Work that needs to be done not because some denominational authority is telling you to do it, but because it matters to you and what you are trying to co-create here together. Work that matters because of the people who came before you and built this community. Work that matters for those who will inherit this community after you, and for those who are just now arriving with their yearnings and their gifts. My friends, I am new in this role, but I am not new here. I love this community. As an intern, this community shaped me into the minister I am today, and it's still shaping me. And I know you can do the work that love requires of you now. To have the difficult conversations, to name the pain, to listen to one another with unconditional love and good boundaries. You can do this because you are not alone. You are held in webs of mutuality and relationship, made visible by our covenants here at UUSM and with the larger UU movement of which you are part. These webs of relationship, like the web of life itself, can be torn but not severed. No matter how much we kick and scream, we cannot be separated from the web of life and love that we are called to orient to as UUs, that we are called to manifest in our living together. Trusting this, may we draw strength and hope and joy from our faith and from this evolving, beloved community. May it be so.